In the shadows of the mountains of Sinaloa, three men rewrote the rules of smuggling in Mexico. Not with armies, but with cunning. Not with blind violence, but with political power. These three men from Sinaloa transformed small-scale illegal trade into Mexico's first true criminal corporation, the Guadalajara Cartel, an organization that would control nearly every trafficking route in the country for an entire decade, and whose downfall would give birth to the cartels we know today. This is the true story of how a former police officer, a shrewd farmer, and a discreet smuggler built an empire that changed Mexico forever. The mountains of Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Durango, known as the Golden Triangle, were the green heart of Mexico. Thousands of hectares of poppy-based crops and green substance grew among the hills, sustaining entire families who had no other options. But that year, everything changed. Operation Condor swept into the region like a military storm. More than 10,000 Mexican Army soldiers, armed helicopters, and strategies learned from South American dictatorships. The mission: eradicate illegal crops. The result: lives taken, disappearances, and mass displacement. Hundreds of farmers fled to the cities. Entire families moved to Guadalajara, Culiacan, and even crossed into the United States. Small-time traffickers were dismantled, but there was something the military did not foresee. By dispersing the traffickers of Sinaloa, they did not eliminate them. They forced them to evolve. They pushed them to reorganize far from the mountains inside the cities. And in that chaos, three men saw an opportunity no one else could see. The architect, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. Born on January 8, 1946 in Culiacan, Sinaloa, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo did not seem destined to become the most powerful trafficker in Mexico. He was tall, slim, refined in his manners. But he possessed something few in the criminal world had: real political connections. Félix Gallardo did not begin as a criminal. He started as an agent of the judicial police of the state of Sinaloa. He later rose through the ranks and became the personal bodyguard of the governor of Sinaloa, Leopoldo Sánchez Celis, in the 1960s. He learned the secrets of power, met politicians, military officials, and judges. He understood that in Mexico, true power did not lie in weapons, but in connections. When Operation Condor destroyed the traditional trafficking structures in Sinaloa, Félix Gallardo saw the entire board. The old bosses were either gone or on the run. Pedro Aviles Perez, considered the first major Mexican trafficker and a pioneer in using small aircraft to move illegal merchandise, had been taken out in 1978 during a shootout with federal police. Some say he was betrayed by his own men who wanted to form their own organization. His death left a massive power vacuum. Félix Gallardo was not the most violent or the wealthiest, but he was the smartest. He knew the future of trafficking was not in the mountains, but in the cities, not in scattered fields, but in centralized operations, not in confronting the government, but in buying it. And to build that empire, he needed partners. The producer, Rafael Caro Quintero. Rafael Caro Quintero was born in October 1952 in Badiraguato, Sinaloa, the same town that decades later would give rise to El Chapo Guzmán. His family was poor. So poor that cultivating poppy-based crops and green substance was not a crime. It was survival. When his father died, Rafael, still a teenager, took responsibility for supporting his family. And he did it the only way he knew how: by planting. But Caro Quintero was not an ordinary farmer. He had an innate business vision. While others planted small hidden plots, he thought big. Before forming the Guadalajara Cartel, Caro Quintero worked for Pedro Aviles Perez, learning routes, methods, and contacts in the United States. When Aviles died, Caro Quintero retained the knowledge and the production infrastructure. He was young, bold, and possessed something Félix Gallardo did not: total control over the cultivation and large-scale production of green substance. They would call him the boss of bosses. And the title was no exaggeration. The veteran, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo was born on August 1, 1930 in Badiraguato, the same town as Caro Quintero, but more than 2 decades earlier. By the time the Guadalajara Cartel was formed, Don Neto was already a seasoned smuggler. He had been involved in illegal trade since the early 1970s, operating routes from Ecuador to Mexico and then into the United States. Don Neto represented the old Sinaloa school, discreet, silent, letting his partners Félix Gallardo and Caro Quintero take the spotlight while he managed operations from the shadows. He had also worked under Pedro Avilés Pérez, and when the pioneer fell, Don Neto joined forces with Félix Gallardo and Caro Quintero. Not out of unchecked ambition, but because he understood that the future of trafficking required organization, not rivalry. While Félix Gallardo was the political mind and Caro Quintero the production genius, Don Neto was the quiet operator who made everything run. The foundation, between 1978 and 1980. After Operation Condor and the death of Pedro Avilés Pérez in 1978, traffickers from Sinaloa were scattered. Many fled to Jalisco, specifically to Guadalajara, Mexico's second-largest city. It was cosmopolitan, had strong infrastructure, was far from the militarized mountains, yet close enough to the northern border. Between 1978 and 1980, somewhere in Guadalajara, the three men met. There is no founding document, no exact date, but the agreement was clear: join forces, control the routes, centralize the trade. Félix Gallardo would provide political protection and organizational structure. Caro Quintero would handle mass production of green substance. Don Neto would manage logistics and international routes. Thus, the Guadalajara Cartel was born. It was the first Mexican criminal organization dedicated exclusively to trafficking of substances. Before them, the trade was disorganized, fragmented, controlled by small family groups or individuals. They turned it into a corporation. And unlike traditional mafias, the Guadalajara Cartel was not built on rigid hierarchies or indiscriminate violence. It was built on massive bribery, government protection, and business efficiency. But the story of the Guadalajara Cartel cannot be told without mentioning a key figure few people know: Juan Ramón Mata Ballesteros. This Honduran trafficker, born in 1945, was responsible for connecting the Colombian organizations of Medellin and Cali with the Guadalajara Cartel. Mata Ballesteros was not just a trafficker, he was an air transport entrepreneur. His company, Setco Airlines, supplied transportation for more than 60% of the white substance entering United States territory. Most shocking of all, Mata Ballesteros operated with the knowledge and protection of the CIA. During the 1980s, his transport network was used to move weapons to the Nicaraguan Contras, the anti-communist force secretly funded by the United States to fight the Sandinista regime. In exchange, the CIA looked the other way regarding his trafficking operations. This was the scandal known as Iran-Contra, illegal merchandise for weapons, with the US government as a silent accomplice. Mata Ballesteros died in prison in the United States on October 30, 2025, after serving decades behind bars. The expansion, from green substance to white substance. At first, the Guadalajara Cartel trafficked what they knew: green substance and poppy-based products into the United States. The routes had already been established since the days of Pedro Avilés. But in the 1980s, something changed the game entirely: Colombian white substance. The organizations of Medellin and Cali, led by figures such as Pablo Escobar, produced white substance on a massive scale in the jungles of Colombia. They flew it in small aircraft to Caribbean islands and from there into the United States. But the Caribbean route was saturated. US authorities were tightening controls. The Colombians needed new routes. Félix Gallardo was the first to see the opportunity. He had already built an impressive logistical infrastructure: land routes, tunnels, clandestine airstrips, distribution networks, and officials on the payroll. He did not need to build anything new. He simply offered the service to the Colombians. The deal was simple. The Colombians produced the white substance. The Mexicans moved it across the border. In return, the Guadalajara Cartel received a percentage of the shipment or a service fee. This was revolutionary. White substance began to flow in industrial quantities, and the Guadalajara Cartel became the indispensable middleman. By the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, they controlled nearly all substance trafficking operations in Mexico. The true secret of the Guadalajara Cartel was not violence, it was systemic corruption. Félix Gallardo understood that confronting the Mexican government was suicide. Buying it, however, was profitable. The Federal Security Directorate, known as the DFS, was Mexico's intelligence agency tasked with protecting the president and combating threats. But in practice, the DFS became the enforcement arm of the Guadalajara Cartel. DFS agents provided official credentials to traffickers, escorted them, warned them of operations, and even took part in kidnappings and harsh interrogations. Rafael Caro Quintero received DFS credentials that made him practically untouchable. Commanders of the judicial police were on Don Neto's payroll. Politicians, governors, even military officers received bribes. This was not isolated corruption. It was a system. One of the most scandalous cases involved Ruben Zuno Arce, brother-in-law of former President Luis Echeverria. Zuno Arce owned green substance plantations and was a key operator within the Guadalajara Cartel. When a Mexican lieutenant discovered his fields and began arresting farmers, they all confessed the land belonged to Zuno Arce. The lieutenant's superior coordinated directly with the trafficker to stop the destruction of the crops. Another name that echoes in the shadows is Manuel Bartlett Diaz, who was Secretary of the Interior in 1985. Declassified DEA documents point to him as one of the figures who allegedly knew about the operations between cartels and Mexican government agencies, and who may have facilitated protection in exchange for bribes. Bartlett has categorically denied these accusations, but the suspicions remain. The ranch that changed everything. Buffalo, 1984. Rafael Caro Quintero had a dream: to build the largest green substance plantation in the world. Not hundreds of scattered hectares in the mountains, thousands of concentrated, industrialized, guarded hectares. And he succeeded. In Chihuahua, in a remote place called Colonia Buffalo, Caro Quintero built a green empire, 6,000 hectares of green substance, 10,000 people working in planting, harvesting, packaging, and distribution, irrigation systems, armed security, airstrips. It was a city dedicated exclusively to producing illegal merchandise. But there was a problem. A DEA agent named Enrique Camarena Salazar, known as Kiki, had been investigating the Guadalajara Cartel since 1981. Assigned to the Jalisco office, Camarena infiltrated the organization by posing as a farmer. He gathered information for years, and in 1984 he discovered Rancho Buffalo. On November 6, 1984, more than 400 Mexican soldiers and dozens of helicopters stormed the ranch. It was the biggest blow to trafficking in Mexico's history at that time. Authorities seized between 2,500 and 10,000 tons of green substance, according to different sources. Dozens of workers were arrested. The infrastructure was destroyed. Caro Quintero lost millions of dollars in a single operation. Some estimates place the value of the harvest at over $2 billion at the time, and he knew exactly who was responsible: Kiki Camarena. The fatal mistake: the abduction of Camarena. On February 7, 1985, Enrique Camarena left the DEA office in Guadalajara to meet his wife. He never arrived, but the plan to abduct him had been set in motion days earlier. According to reports later revealed by El Sol de Mexico, on the night of February 3, 1985, Don Neto and Caro Quintero orchestrated the abduction during a party at the home of Victor Manuel Lopez Razon, an agent of the judicial police of the state of Jalisco and Don Neto's personal bodyguard. That day, 4 men, Samuel Ramirez Razo, José Luis Gallardo Parra, Jorge Fonseca Uribe, known as El Güero, and Gerardo Ramon Torres Lepeca, intercepted Camarena in broad daylight. José Luis Gallardo had a contact inside the U.S. consulate, a passport visa employee who helped identify Camarena as he left the building. He was handed directly over to Rafael Caro Quintero. Camarena was taken to a house located at 881 Lope de Vega Street in Guadalajara. Waiting for him there were Caro Quintero, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and most likely Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. Also present were DFS agents such as Sergio Espino Verdín and police officers including Mario Martinez Herrera. A doctor named Humberto Alvarez Machain was forced to keep Camarena alive during the violent interrogation sessions. What happened over the next 48 hours became one of the most brutal cases of abuse ever documented in the history of substance trafficking in Mexico. Camarena was subjected to harsh interrogation. They demanded names of informants, details of operations, and information about infiltrators. During the interrogation, which was recorded on audio, Camarena admitted that he had spent years investigating the organization's green substance and white substance trafficking operations. He was beaten repeatedly. Pieces of cloth were forced into his mouth. His airways were obstructed with adhesive tape. He was struck in the head with an L-shaped metal tool until his skull was shattered. On February 9, 1985, Enrique Camarena's life was taken due to asphyxiation and severe head trauma. Along with him, Mexican pilot Alfredo Zavala Avelar was also taken out. Zavala had assisted the DEA in aerial operations. Their bodies were transported and abandoned at a ranch in the community of La Angostura, in the municipality of Vista Hermosa, Michoacán. They were discovered on March 5, 1985. Operation Legend, when the United States declared war. The death of Kiki Camarena triggered an unprecedented diplomatic crisis between Mexico and the United States. It was not just the loss of a federal agent, it was a message that the Guadalajara Cartel operated with total impunity, taking out U.S. officials on Mexican soil without consequences. The response from the United States was forceful and coordinated. The DEA launched Operation Legend, named in Camarena's honor. It was the first major operation in the agency's history focused on completely dismantling a foreign criminal organization. DEA Administrator John C. Lawn declared they would not rest until every person responsible was brought before U.S. justice. Hundreds of agents were deployed not only across the United States but also in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. A special task force of more than 150 agents was created to work exclusively on the Camarena case. Pressure on the Mexican government was intense and multifaceted. The United States implemented Operation Interception 2, practically shutting down the border for weeks. Every vehicle attempting to cross into the U.S. was thoroughly inspected, causing delays of up to 8 hours at border crossings. Bilateral trade came to a halt. Economic losses for Mexico reached millions. The message was clear. Either the Mexican government handed over those responsible, or the border would remain closed indefinitely. Operation Legend exposed the depth of corruption in Mexico. DEA agents discovered that high-ranking Mexican government officials, including members of the DFS, had directly participated in Camarena's abduction and violent interrogation. The interrogation recordings, which lasted more than 30 hours, were analyzed by forensic experts who identified the voices of Mexican agents present during the abuse. This confirmed what many had long suspected. The Guadalajara Cartel did not merely enjoy government protection, but active participation from state agents in its criminal operations. Raids multiplied across Mexican territory. Diplomatic pressure forced President Miguel de la Madrid to order mass crackdowns. Dozens of low-level traffickers were arrested. Safe houses were raided. But the major leaders remained on the run. The hunt extended beyond Mexico. DEA agents tracked bank movements, properties, and contacts in the United States, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Europe. On April 4, 1985, just 2 months after the crime, Rafael Caro Quintero was located in Costa Rica. He was hiding at Quintala, California, a luxurious residence in the community of San Rafael de Ojo de Agua, Alajuela. With him was Sara Cristina Cosío Vidaurri Martinez, daughter of Jalisco's former Secretary of Education and niece of a former governor. Costa Rican authorities, under pressure from the United States, stormed the property. Caro Quintero attempted to bribe them with millions of dollars, but he was arrested and immediately deported to Mexico. His capture was celebrated as a diplomatic victory, but it also revealed the extent of his connections. He traveled with false passports, DFS credentials, and enough cash to buy his freedom in almost any country. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo was arrested shortly afterward in Puerto Vallarta. Unlike Caro Quintero, Don Neto did not attempt to flee the country. He knew his age and low-profile style would not allow him to evade international pressure. He was arrested at his residence without resistance and transferred to a maximum security prison. But the primary target remained free, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. For 4 more years, the boss of bosses managed to evade capture, operating from the shadows, reorganizing the cartel and negotiating with politicians and Colombian organizations. Operation Legend did not stop. U.S. agents offered multi-million-dollar rewards for information leading to his arrest. Pressure on Mexico did not ease. And slowly his protection network began to collapse. The fall of the empire. 1989, the end of an era. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo was finally arrested on April 8, 1989 in Guadalajara. But his capture was not the result of a shootout or a dramatic chase. It was a negotiated, quiet, almost ceremonial surrender. The man who arrested him was Commander Guillermo González Calderoni of the Federal Judicial Police, a figure who had worked both for the Mexican government and the DEA, and who had known Félix Gallardo for years. They were close associates. They had shared meals, deals, and secrets. González Calderoni arrived at Félix Gallardo's hideout in Culiacán with a small group of agents. He knocked on the door. He announced himself. There was no violence. Félix Gallardo came out, said goodbye to his family, and surrendered without resistance. He knew his time was over. The political protection that had shielded him for a decade was gone. The politicians who once accepted his bribes now saw him as a liability. The United States demanded his capture, and the Mexican government, under international pressure and weakened by corruption scandals, had no choice but to hand him over. But Félix Gallardo's arrest was not just the fall of one man. It marked the end of an era. The centralized model he had created, where a single leader controlled all territories and negotiated with every Colombian organization, collapsed with him. For years, Félix Gallardo had maintained peace among different trafficking groups through agreements, territorial divisions, and shared profits. Without him, that structure fell apart. In December 1989, Rafael Caro Quintero was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the abduction and killing of Enrique Camarena and Alfredo Zavala. He was sent to the Altiplano maximum security prison. He remained incarcerated for 28 years until 2013, when a collegiate court ordered his release due to alleged procedural irregularities, arguing that he should not have been tried under federal jurisdiction. The decision caused outrage in the United States. The DEA and the U.S. government denounced the release as the product of corruption and political pressure. Caro Quintero was released in August 2013, but his freedom lasted only 9 years. In July 2022, he was recaptured during an operation in Sinaloa and remains in U.S. custody facing trial. In 2025, previously unheard recordings of his involvement in Camarena's violent interrogation were presented as evidence in U.S. courts, further complicating his legal situation. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo was sentenced in 2017 to 37 years in prison for Camarena's death. He has spent more than 3 decades incarcerated, first at the Altiplano and later transferred to a lower security facility in the state of Morelos due to his deteriorating health. He is blind, suffers from severe hearing problems, and his condition has declined dramatically. In recent interviews, he has maintained that he is innocent of Camarena's death, claiming that DFS agents took control of the interrogation and that he never ordered the abuse or the agent's death. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Don Neto, served a 40-year sentence, much of it under house arrest due to his advanced age and health issues. He was officially released in 2025 at the age of 95. In November 2025, he filed a legal action demanding financial compensation from the Mexican government, alleging that his case was riddled with irregularities, that he was abused during his detention, and that his human rights were violated. His case joins a long list of incarcerated traffickers who have accused Mexican authorities of misconduct. The fragmentation that created modern cartels. With Félix Gallardo behind bars, the Guadalajara Cartel collapsed, but it did not disappear. It fractured into multiple organizations that divided Mexican territory like a chessboard. That fragmentation gave rise to the cartels we know today and that have turned Mexico into one of the most violent countries in the world. Before his arrest, Félix Gallardo, with the help of Commander Guillermo González Calderoni, organized a summit meeting in 1989. Accounts differ on the exact location. Some say Acapulco, others Guadalajara, others Mexico City. But the goal was clear: divide territories, assign control zones, and prevent a civil war among cartel lieutenants. Félix Gallardo knew his capture was imminent, and rather than leaving power to chance, he chose to distribute it among his most loyal and capable operators. The Tijuana territory was handed to the Arellano Félix brothers, nephews of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. Benjamin Arellano Félix, born on March 12, 1952, was considered the founder and strategic mind behind the Tijuana cartel. Alongside his brothers Ramon, Eduardo, Francisco Javier, and Enadina, they built one of the most violent and sophisticated criminal organizations in Mexico. They specialized in the Baja California route into California. controlling the Tijuana-San Diego crossing, one of the busiest border corridors in the world. The Arellano Félix brothers innovated in the use of violence. They were pioneers in employing professional hitmen, paying wealthy narco juniors to carry out killings and infiltrating law enforcement agencies at unprecedented levels. Ciudad Juarez fell under the control of Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, who was taken out shortly afterward, leaving power in the hands of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, known as the Lord of the Skies. Born on December 17, 1954 in Navolato, Sinaloa, Amado Carrillo transformed the Juarez cartel into a criminal powerhouse. His nickname came from his fleet of more than 20 Boeing 727 aircraft used to transport tons of white substance from Colombia into Mexico. At the height of his power, Carrillo Fuentes was believed to move 4 times more white substance than any other organization. His group controlled the Ciudad Juarez-El Paso corridor, turning Juarez into one of the most violent cities on the planet. The Sinaloa region was divided among several operators, but 2 names stood out: Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia and Joaquín Guzmán Loera, El Chapo, who would eventually consolidate the Sinaloa cartel. El Chapo had worked under Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo within the Guadalajara Cartel throughout the 1980s, serving as a transporter and coordinator of white substance shipments. He was young, ambitious, and possessed a natural talent for logistics. In 1989, when Félix Gallardo was captured, Guzmán and Héctor Luis El Güero Palma Salazar took advantage of the fragmentation to form their own organization. The Sinaloa cartel would go on to become the most powerful criminal organization in the world over the next 3 decades. It controlled routes throughout nearly all of Mexico, established cells in more than 50 countries, and at its peak was estimated to generate annual profits exceeding $3 billion. El Chapo Guzmán became the most wanted trafficker in the world, escaping twice from maximum security prisons until his final capture in 2016 and extradition to the United States in 2017, where he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Other territories were divided among smaller operators: Sonora, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, each controlled by groups that would later grow into their own cartels. The Carrillo Fuentes organization in Juarez, the Valencia family in Michoacán, which would later give rise to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the Beltran Leyva faction that split from the Sinaloa Cartel, and Los Zetas, which emerged as the enforcement arm of the Gulf Cartel. All of these groups trace their origins, directly or indirectly, to the fragmentation of the Guadalajara Cartel. This territorial division transformed substance trafficking in Mexico. What had once been a corporate monopoly with clear rules and centralized leadership became a fragmented and violently competitive marketplace. The wars between organizations that have scarred Mexico from the 1990s to the present are a direct consequence of that fragmentation. Each group seeks to expand its territory, control more routes, and eliminate competitors, and in that process, tens of thousands of lives have been taken in the wars born from the empire. The fragmentation of the Guadalajara Cartel did not just create new organizations, it created deadly rivalries, violent betrayals, and wars that would claim tens of thousands of lives. One of the most brutal was the conflict between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Tijuana Cartel. Héctor Luis Palma Salazar, known as El Güero Palma, was a close associate of El Chapo and had been part of the Guadalajara Cartel's operations. He worked as a lieutenant for Félix Gallardo on the routes into California. But the Arellano Félix brothers, who had been given control of Tijuana, saw him as a dangerous rival threatening their territory. Tensions escalated rapidly, and in the midst of that conflict, the Arellano Félix brothers decided to send a message that would be etched into the history of Mexican trafficking as one of the most extreme acts of cruelty ever recorded. The Arellano Félix Organization infiltrated a Venezuelan operative named Rafael Clavel Moreno into the ranks of the Sinaloa Cartel. Clavel was attractive, charismatic, intelligent. He earned the trust of the organization and specifically of El Güero Palma's family. For months, Clavel attended meetings, parties, and operations. No one suspected a thing. And then he carried out his plan. Clavel seduced Guadalupe Leja Serrano, the wife of El Güero Palma. He convinced her that her husband was unfaithful, that he did not value her, that she deserved something better. Eventually, he persuaded her to flee with him to San Francisco, California, taking her 2 children with her, Natalie and Hector, just 4 and 5 years old. Guadalupe emotionally manipulated a greed. They left Mexico without Palma knowing where they were. Once in San Francisco, Rafael Clavel carried out the second phase of his mission. He took Guadalupe Leja Serrano's life in an extremely violent manner. Then he took the two children to a bridge. In front of their terrified eyes, he killed them in a particularly brutal way. He placed the three heads in a gift box, sent it by courier to Mexico, and addressed it directly to Hector Luis Palma Salazar. When El Güero opened the box and saw the heads of his wife and two children, something inside him broke forever. The message from the Arellano Félix brothers was clear. No one was safe, not even families. The brutality of the act marked a turning point in the violence of Mexican trafficking. Before that, there had been an unwritten rule. Families were off limits. After that moment, every code disappeared. In retaliation, El Güero Palma ordered Rafael Clavel Moreno to be taken out. Clavel was located in a prison in Venezuela and eliminated in a brutal way. Palma also ordered the elimination of Clavel's lawyer and three of the lawyer's children. The war between the Sinaloa and Tijuana organizations intensified. Hundreds of people lost their lives in the streets of Tijuana, Culiacan, and Mazatlan. Hitmen ambushed rivals. Entire families were wiped out. Corrupted authorities looked the other way. This conflict would last more than a decade and permanently change the way criminal organizations operated. Violence became theatrical, public, designed to terrorize. Deaths were no longer silent. They were messages. Banners, bodies left hanging from bridges, killings recorded on video. All of it traced back to that fragmentation of 1989.